Howdy, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. We appreciate your support and continue to keep your eyes on some of our webinars that we've been offering. Just go ahead and open up. I'm Kenny Taylor. I'll moderate today's session, which is budgeting during pandemic. And today we have Mr. Sean Hale with Sean Hale Consulting. Uh, Really good friend of mine from years ago over in the Austin area. And I'll just go ahead and give you all a few details about Sean and his background. Let me first get into, I'll just go ahead and get into an introduction of our center first, and then I'll go through some details regarding Sean. We were founded in 2017 over at the Bush School, and our mission with the center really truly is to support nonprofit organizations with a focus on research or professional outreach and development services with nonprofit organizations, and really to provide leadership for those that are interested in supporting the sector itself, which is flourishing here in the state of Texas and, of course, throughout the country. Just real quick on our values, we, of course, value nonprofit organizations. We shifted, just like many of you all, to focus on how we could best serve nonprofit organizations during the pandemic. And that's what this led to with our webinar series, literally, that we've been offering since March. We absolutely value opportunity for all as well, which is primarily our diversity statement, knowing that cultural diversity at nonprofit organizations is highly important when we think about the growth of our organizations, how they look tomorrow, demographic changes in leadership. So preparing all that are out there that are interested in supporting the sector is extremely important. We have expertise in both board governance and leadership over at our center with Dr. Will Brown and myself. And then our engagement, all of us are engaged throughout the communities that we serve. Texas A&M is a land-grant university. And so we truly have a commitment to service in our local area and, of course, across the state of Texas. So our engagement is really what we try to focus on in terms of attracting folks that would take advantage of things like this and other activities that we have or those that we engage with throughout mostly the state, but certainly we try to prioritize areas that are underserved. So the educational opportunities, we have our in-residence Masters of Public Service and Administration program, our Executive Master of Public Service and Administration, which is an online program. We have our graduate certificate, and then we also just recently launched our certificate in nonprofit leadership, which also encompasses professional education and continuing education courses. I'll move on to a quick legal disclaimer. I won't read through that, but this was provided by today's speaker. And then I'll just go ahead and move to a few details about Sean. Like I mentioned, Sean and I met, we were just talking about it not too long ago, maybe 10 to 12 years ago over in the Austin market when I was with Big Brothers Big Sisters. The way that worked out was we both graduated from Bellarmine University, which is a private Catholic institution over in Louisville, Kentucky. And we were reaching out trying to find out who was in the Austin market that were alum of the school, and that's how we met. Since then, we've had a great ongoing relationship. Sean has more than 20 years of experience in the nonprofit sector. So to one of the notes that I put out, if you're a practitioner, you really have some great experience. So excited to have him today. Former chief financial officer over at Mission Capital, who we still work with today. Independent consultant, went out on his own recently, and he specializes in finance, technology, HR, and operations, which I think is primarily built off of his experience over at Mission Capital, where he really assisted a variety of nonprofits with their back office stuff. So I'll let him go into further detail, but let's welcome Sean. Sean, thank you so much for being here. We appreciate it.
Dr. Taylor, thank you so much for having me here, and thank the Center for Nonprofits and Philanthropy. It's really an honor to get to present to everybody today and present on one of the topics that, I can't say I love talking about the pandemic. I'm kind of sick of it, but this is a topic that I think is it's something I've had on my mind for months and months, how we're gonna help the nonprofit sector get through this challenging time. And so what I'm hoping to cover today, budgeting, when I think about all the years that I've done budgeting for nonprofits, like it's always a challenge. I've never met anybody yet, at least, who says, gosh, budget season's coming up, I can't wait to dig in, right? If you're that person and you're there, like, please let me know afterwards. I just want to meet you. Pandemics and other disasters, other stresses in the life of an organization can make budgeting harder, and especially when it's not just the organization that's experiencing the pinch, but everybody around you who might normally be able to lend a hand, funders and other nonprofits and whatnot. We could do a whole course on just budgeting, or a whole course on managing through crises. So we can't cover it all today, but I do want to cover 3 big lessons. The first one being, there we go. The difference between frugal and cheap. This is something that I've seen over and over again in my experience with nonprofits, and understanding that difference can help you navigate these waters in the coming months, navigate those waters better. Getting buy-in for difficult decisions, because most nonprofits, you are going to have to be making very difficult decisions in the coming months, and it's so important that you bring your staff and your key stakeholders along with you, so they're not just feeling like, well, somebody dreamed this up in a smoke-filled room, right? And last of all, managing wildcards, because almost all nonprofits have unknowns when it comes to budget season, and you're going to have more of those with the pandemic. So how do we kind of put together a budget when there are just so many things that we can't nail down? So to get us started with the frugal versus cheap, I want to talk about our American tradition of culture of cheapness. And this is something that goes back to the arrival of the Puritans and the Calvinists in these lands, right? And they brought with them the idea that joy is sinful, that abstinence is a virtue, and it kind of boils down to, for this kind of culture that they helped to imbue the nation with, that price tags end up being these moral documents and just kind of a big wag of the feature, if not your road to perdition. And this is still alive today, right? We might not be burning witches at the stake anymore, but we still have this tradition alive today in the overhead myth. And this is basically a zombie belief, as Paul Krugman would call it, right? That 400 years after the Mayflower and Plymouth Rock, we're still dealing with this legacy that basically be cheap, be cheap, be cheap. And the overhead myth, you could do a whole course on just that. Dan Pallotta has a great TED Talk on it, and he wrote a book about it as well. But it kind of boils down to the percentage of expenses that are spent on overhead is a measure of impact. Hey, everybody, say hi to Santiago, my 5-year-old. Yeah, he's going to put the sign on the door that tells him not to come in. All right. Yeah, can you put that on the door, please? Yeah. So, and for those of you who are curious about the overhead myth, or who like studying it, the CNP's Dr. Ellie Chu has just published an interesting scholarly article on this topic. So it's still a dragon that we in the sector, we need to continue to try and slay, because it's still harming nonprofits. And that's a lot of why I bring it up, that this culture of cheapness, this overhead myth, it compels so many good nonprofit leaders to make choices that are penny wise and pound foolish. And it is so invasive that we internalize these values. We don't even realize that we're doing it anymore. It's just part of what we do. We brush our teeth in the morning and we comb our hair and we do things that are cheap, 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 cheap. So what happens then, ultimately, we're hurting our nonprofits and we can lose sight of the big picture. So for example, if you personally, let's say you need new pants, right? If you take this pure price tag approach, you're going to get those $5 pants, right? But we also know in the back of our heads, like if we apply that to our personal lives and we buy that $5 pair of pants, they might not make it through the first wash. And bottom line being, we have to keep an eye on the big picture, and that's going to be part of us getting out of this culture of cheapness. But don't just take my word for it. I know a lot of you are academics, so let's hear some academics on cheapness. So after the last recession, some smart guys got together and they did a scholarly, did research and a paper for the Harvard Business Review. Ranjay Gulati, Nitin Nohria, and Franz Volgezogen. And the kind of basic thesis, the kind of thing that they saw come out of this research boils down to, quote, companies that master the delicate balance between cutting costs to survive today and investing to grow tomorrow do well after a recession. these companies reduced costs selectively by focusing more on operational efficiency, even as they invest relatively comprehensively in the future. The article goes on to make clear that making across-the-board cuts and cutting future investments, that's cheapness, and that's really dangerous if you want your organization to survive. And so instead, what they really saw that the organizations that had the best chance of making it through an economic downturn were those that combined strategic cuts with strategic investments. So being very careful and intentional about those things. And so that brings us to frugality, because frugality is so much smarter than cheapness. And so successful nonprofits, you will see over and over again that they do choose frugality. They don't just look at that price tag, right, which would be cheapness. They don't just look to minimize their direct expenses. Instead, they try to look at both the forest and the trees. So they can really balance those two things. Ultimately, they maximize the total value and impact. So they're looking at return on investment. So they're asking themselves questions like, how long is this product going to last, right? And so if they're getting that, going out to buy new pants, right? It's not just $5 is the cheapest pair of pants I can get, but they'll fall apart in a week. It's, wow, I can get these $20 pants and they'll last me a year, right? How long is this product going to last me? How efficient is this tool? Can it help me increase our productivity so we can do more in the same amount of time? What's the overall impact for us of choosing X over Y? Those are the kinds of questions that can help your organization get out of that loop of cheapness and make much smarter decisions that'll help you make it through the recession and pandemic that we're living in. Of course, you know, to make this fun, because we all like research and data, I'd like to ask everybody to open a spare window or your smartphone and give a little feedback here. Maybe I'm totally off base, but just in case I'm not, could you go to menti.com, menti.com, and plug in the code there, 118177-2. And I think you should be able to go ahead and give your responses to these answers, to your answers to these questions, right? About, have you ever seen these kinds of things in a nonprofit, like the computer that's being held together with duct tape and a prayer, right? Or have you ever seen a nonprofit that's using software and they limit themselves to software that's just free or it's super cheap, right? Even if there are some other products that are gonna help them really kick butt. Or have you ever seen a nonprofit where everybody has to train themselves how to use the software? And so people are just kind of muddling along and they never really master the software. Or have you ever seen a situation in a nonprofit where they have a dozen different systems that don't integrate with each other, and so they're entering the data here and here and here and here. Those things aren't talking to each other. They can get messy data because it might get updated in this system but not in the other system. Or have you ever seen a nonprofit with do-it-yourself tech support? Let me see how we're doing. We got a couple of people who have seen this. Let me give another few seconds for folks to give their responses. Thank you for validating that I'm not the only one seeing this craziness in the nonprofit system. All right, so good. Thank you to those of you who have responded. And I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next slide, but we are going to go back to Menti again here during the presentation. So don't totally close out of that window. There'll be another slide for us to look at. So how do we transition from cheap to frugal? Because it's a transition. It's like anything. Once there's a deeply ingrained behavior, it takes a while to break it. And it's something that I love helping nonprofits do, is turn that around, because it can be so transformational. And so let me tell you a story. Once upon a time, I got to serve a great nonprofit, has a smart, dedicated staff, a blue ribbon board, community respect, and has a big impact in the community. So great organization. But then I got to looking around a little bit, and my goodness, if you had seen the laptops that all the staff were using, the staff had gotten their laptops because they were secondhand from a grant maker. And the grant maker had decided, this equipment isn't good for our staff anymore. It's too slow and not working right, but maybe some nonprofit would like it. And so sure enough, this nonprofit said, yes, please. And so the equipment was old when they got it secondhand, and they'd had it several years beyond that. And so as you might expect, these laptops, they wouldn't hold a charge. They needed constant tech support. they were slow, needed frequent rebooting. So all these kinds of productivity issues were coming out of using this equipment. And on top of that, as you might expect, this is the kind of thing that also causes morale problems, you guys. And it's one of those funny little things about the nonprofit sector that I don't see us talking about nearly enough, where if you don't have strong morale, if you're not telling staff with your choices, not just yours, but your choices and the way you're spending your money, that their time is important, they're not going to work as hard, and or they're going to go away. And turnover is crazy expensive. The research I've seen will show you that anywhere from the cost of turnover in a position can cost you anywhere from 75% to 125% of the annual expense on that position. So turnover is really expensive. We should do something about that, even if it's not a line item in the budget, right? So I saw the situation. I went to the executive director and said, first I said to myself, hey, this ED, smart, savvy business person. So hopefully this will be an easy sell. And so I just went in, and my communication plan was, this is so obviously bad. We have to do something about it. Unfortunately, my plan A didn't work out right, and it fell on deaf ears. So I had to go back to my desk and cook up a plan B. So I crunched the numbers, and then the next time I met with the executive director, I walked through this with him. And here are the numbers. It's not complicated math at all. I conservatively estimated that the average staff person was losing 15 minutes a day in productivity. It's probably a whole lot more than that, but just conservative estimate of 15 minutes a day. That translates into 60 hours a year. That's a week and a half where they're being paid not for vacation, but to be sitting there waiting for their computer to do something. If we figure that the average comp for the organization actually was on, this is a conservative figure, the average comp was higher than this, but just conservatively, if we figure that between salary and benefits is $50,000 a year, that works out to $25 an hour that we're paying somebody to sit there and wait for their computer to do something. And you multiply 25 times 60, and that gets us to $1,500 a year. That doesn't compare very well with the cost of a new laptop over at Dell or HP or wherever, right? $700. And so I was able to show pretty quickly using math and being able to speak, even kind of using a little bit of that language of cheapness, but kind of spelling it all out, that these laptops are going to pay for themselves in less than 6 months. And PS, they're going to last us 2 to 5 years. And so when I showed this to the executive director, the response was, oh my gosh, this is so obviously bad. We really need to do something about it. And we did. And it was great for the organization's productivity. And it was also a very good morale boost. It was communicating directly to people that their time is important and how they use it is important, and that we valued them as staff. So that's what I have to say about cheapness for now. Let's talk about creating buy-in for difficult decisions, because that's going to be really important too, right? Even if you and a handful of people kind of know that a specific difficult decision needs to be made, if you just go out there and tell people that this is the way it's going to be, you're going to get a lot of pushback, a lot of resentment. You don't want that, right? You want everybody, your stakeholders, your staff, your board, everybody pulling in the same direction. And so that's why I want to share with you one of my favorite tools, the matrix map. It's a best practice in good times or bad, and it's a great tool to use, especially when you're having to make tough financial decisions. Dr. Chu, she mentioned this in her July presentation. She did. If you guys haven't seen this in the archives, go back and check it out. She also did a good presentation back in July on doing financials for nonprofits during a pandemic. It included a mention of the matrix map. And today we're going to actually walk through a live scenario to see how you might apply that to your organizations. And this is something you can use with staff, you can use with stakeholders to get their buy-in. And actually, you can very often get some interesting information from people. So it's not just, and please do not use this like I'm going to be showing it to you in a kind of presentation style. Use it in an interactive style to get people to think these things through. And you might be surprised by what you learn in the process. It's not just them ratifying something you've come up with, but you might very well learn something that changes your mind as well. So how are we going to use this matrix map thing, and what the heck is it? So it's a tool, basic, simple tool to quickly compare programs and major activities in your nonprofit. And all we're going to do is basically take those major activities and set them in one of these 4 quadrants, right? And profitability, that's runs from left to right. And basically, if you have an activity that loses money, it's going to go over on the left-hand side. If you have an activity that has a net profit, it'll go over on the right-hand side. And this is information, this is actually the objective part of this, because if you're doing your financial reports well, you should be able to pull and identify the profitability of each program over the past 12 months. If this is something that you don't have in your financial reports right now, you should expect it and demand it. It's not rocket science, and so please do get somebody to help you with that, or talk to me afterwards, because it's really key for making good decisions, especially in a pandemic, but even during good times. From top to bottom, we have our mission impact, and basically what that speaks to is how much does this activity help move the needle on our mission? This is different from the absolute worth to society of an activity, right? An activity can have tremendous worth to society, but it just isn't necessarily as strongly aligned with your mission. For example, if your mission is to feed the hungry, a soup kitchen is going to have high mission impact, right? Because there's a really strong direct relationship between those two activities. Giving pets to the people at the soup kitchen is going to have less of a mission impact, right? It's less clear how that helps to drive down hunger for that human population. And so that doesn't speak to the relative value of pets versus soup, but they do have a different impact on your ability to move your mission forward. So let's dig into these quadrants, right? How are we going to be using these? And so quadrant D, that's where your activities that have a low mission impact and a low profitability land. And those are the activities that either need a big change or should be going away, right? Those are not the kind of activities that your organization should be doing year after year in good times or bad. Quadrant A, this is your activities that have a high mission impact but low profitability. So they feed our heart, but we're losing money on them. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. So many worthy and important things happen in our society because nonprofits are doing them, even though they lose money. So that doesn't mean we stop it, but we need to know that that's happening, and it should be intentional that we're going to lose money on a program, right? It should be an eyes wide open kind of thing, also because we need to know how to pay for it. And speaking of which, it's quadrant C, that's where the activities that have a low mission impact but high profitability are, right? So they don't necessarily speak to our heart, but maybe that's where the money comes from to pay for the things that speak to our heart. And so we definitely want to identify those and speak to where they fit on the matrix map. And finally, we have our very favorite activity, and that's the activity that has a big mission impact, but also is highly profitable, right? Those are the kinds of activities that we want to know what they are right now so that we can find ways to increase those even more, right? We want to be very intentional about that. If we're making money on it and it drives the mission, can we double that? Can we triple that? Those are the kinds of questions that I hope your organizations are in a position to ask yourselves. So let's give an almost real life example, right? This is the Save the Dog Society, which I invented, but I think it has some basis in reality. So the Save the Dog Society has a mission. We save dogs. Really simple, straightforward, and thank goodness, because that's the kind of mission you need to really help guide you through difficult decisions. And the organization has 5 major activities over the course of the year. The first one is the cat adoption program. And this is a pilot project. It began 2 years ago with a grant from a donor. And the kind of question was, hey, could we take the lessons we learned working with canines and apply those to felines? So it was an interesting idea. It was a good idea, but the grant has run out. And so running this program next year, it would lose money and it would have a low mission impact, because the mission is we save dogs and cats aren't dogs. And remember, this is not a comment on the relative worthiness of cats and dogs. They're both lovely animals, but it is a comment on the overlap between that animal and the organization's mission. So activity number 2, the annual gala. The annual gala, it doesn't do much to move the mission, right? Dogs aren't getting adopted there, but it brings in a lot of money. The organization has figured out how to really make it not just friend raising, but strong fundraising. And so again, it's on the bottom half of the screen because it's not, important mission activities aren't happening there, but money's coming in that feeds the mission. So it's important to know that, because sometimes your galas, they lose money. And if they're losing money and they're low mission impact and they're in quadrant G, that might be the year to think about changing things up on your fundraising strategy, right? So activity number 3, dog adoption. This is the organization's big program. thousands of dogs are getting adopted every year through the shelter. And so big mission impact, right? But it also loses a little bit of money, right? You're not able to price it in a way where you can do that. But the gala is offsetting that program. So it comes out in the wash, and that's a good thing. And then finally, there's dogs.com. And this is one of the nifty things about the Save the Dog Society is that dogs.com, it began as just a little passion project by an intern 20 years ago. And it has become the go-to place for nonprofits like yours around the country, right? This is where the nonprofits go to, where they know they can get great training for their staff. They can find great materials for their staff and for social media and things like that. And so it's helping nationwide work with dogs. And so it's a low expense because you'd be doing a lot of the work anyway, but big revenue, and it's leveraging the stuff you'd be doing anyway to help hundreds of similar organizations fulfill their mission. So this is really the sweet spot, right? Mission impact and profitability. And so this is the kind of activity that you would want to ask yourself, like, is there a way that we can double down on this and make it, higher impact and more revenue? Activity number 5 is the Dog Theater. And this was the original program of the organization. It was founded 60 years ago. But in a digital world, popularity has been declining, right? So new people are not coming to the Dog Theater. It's still the same volunteers that have been doing it for the last 20, 30 years, and it's beloved by some of those volunteers and donors, but it's losing some money. And because dog adoptions aren't happening there anymore, new people aren't coming into the organization, really the mission impact, it's a pretty low mission impact as well. And so this is the kind of activity that should really be considered. Maybe this is the time to spin this out, because it does take attention away from other activities. And so it is distracting to the board and staff. Is this a time to spin out Dog Theater so that that attention can be put into other programs that are going to drive the mission more? So that's it for the matrix map. And so again, to summarize, it's a great tool to bring clarity and greater objectivity to the budgeting process. It's a good tool to really engage your key stakeholders in those budgetary decisions, so they really feel like they're participating in that process. And sometimes they're providing really great data to you and great insights that you might not otherwise have. And so again, please don't use it as kind of one-way communication. Instead, use it as a way to engage your folks. And very often you'll find that instead of them resisting some difficult decisions, they might be the ones who are really taking the lead to spin out the Dog Theater. It might be that the person who's leading the charge on that for 20 years says, yep, it's time to do this, where if you impose the decision on them, they might have resisted it tooth and nail and lit fires on their way out the door. So that's the last thing you need right now, is somebody lighting fires. Let's talk about the last big area for us to cover today, and that's our budgeting wildcards. And budgeting, it always has wildcards, unless you're one of those organizations that just has, one big grant source that they always renew every year, no matter what. And for most organizations, coronavirus has multiplied our wildcards. And so a colleague reached out to me for advice on how to manage this for his organization. I'm going to share with you what I shared with him. But before we do that, I'd like to ask you to go back to menti.com. The code again is 1181-77-2. I might need to activate that here over on my other screen. So there we go. We're going to be talking about what has us worried. So, because wildcards, let me take a drink while you guys are filling out your Menti. Thank you. Yeah, wildcards, those create uncertainty, and uncertainty can be a great stress and a great worry for us. And that's the last thing right now. We already have too much stress and too much worry. And I can tell you for myself that when it comes to giving, I was always a budget season. I was always worried about donor and funder revenue, right? And but now, now that we're in a pandemic, I kind of yearn for those days when I had fewer wildcards to worry about. Safety and illness, we're having to think about that in all new ways, both our own personal safety and illness, but for the folks that we're serving and our staff, we have the extra expense of PPE sometimes for our staff and for other folks. Of course, productivity for a lot of organizations, I know it's down because of the time that goes into these protective measures. Some of us, like you saw with me just a minute ago, some of us have children at home, and that also can have our impact on productivity. So let's see how our results are coming in. All right, people are worried, especially the donors and the fundraising events is coming out on top. All right, thank you for sharing that. So let's talk about managing your budgets and managing those wildcards. And yeah, you guys, I do mean budgets plural, but that does not mean 2 or 3 times the work. We're going to be talking through kind of how that doesn't need to be. There's going to be a little bit more work for you, but it doesn't need to be 2 or 3 times the work. And the reason we're going to be doing budgets, one of the reasons is that it's a whole lot easier to think difficult decisions through before the crisis, right? That's why we do fire drills. So we're not trying to figure that out when there is actually a fire. And the other reason we want to do that is we want board and stakeholder confidence. If they know we have a plan, they're going to have a whole lot more confidence in us and our leadership. And the last thing we need during these times is board or other stakeholders who are anxious, because that can create its own problems. So we're going to be starting off. We're going to walk through 3 different options here. A lot of organizations, you want to do at least 2, some 3. Of course, there's our worst case scenario. And this is where all of your different wildcards end up bad for you, right? And when you're building a budget, your worst case scenario budget, that's where you show kind of how you're going to make the most of a really bad situation. And so if, funding all the different wildcards end up bad, what are the layoffs you're going to make? What are the programs you're going to close? That sort of thing. And of course, we also have our best case scenario where there is literally a case of money that shows up on the doorstep. And that's also, we want to think that one through, where all the wild cards do turn up in our favor. At least in many cases, we do want to have that one in mind. But for most organizations, if you only have 1 or 2 wild cards, you can get away with just doing those 2 budgets, right? If what's at risk is just one big grant, then you can kind of figure out pretty quickly with a fine-tooth comb kind of where your risk point is, where your decision points are, and just kind of like it's A or B. But for some other organizations that have some complexity and have multiple wildcards, then you might need to be thinking about both your dollars and your pennies, and maybe even lighting a little candle for help and support. And so this is, for a lot of us, we're going to be building a most likely scenario budget. And if you're lucky and you have good data and good clarity from folks, then you might be able to make an educated guess. Sometimes you don't have that data that you really need to make it even an educated guess. And so you might just have to split the difference between worst case and best case scenario, and kind of make your best one, because you can't wait forever for perfect information, right? So really, one of the key things here in the process when you're putting together budgets is to keep it simple. And most times, it's going to be enough for you to really do just one main budget, right? So just like you would do in any year, you're going to be doing a fully fleshed out budget. And very often that'll be enough. And then you're going to be doing kind of like appendices, if you will, where it's not a fully developed main budget, but it does kind of spell out, if this happens, then we're going to do that, right? If grant A doesn't come in, then we will cut this position, this position, this position. But let's dig into that a little bit further. What does that really kind of start to look like? And let's talk about our good friends at the Save the Dog Society again. They're good people. They're trying to make the most of a bad situation this year. And so they've decided that they're going to go with a most likely scenario budget, because they do have wild cards that could turn out well and wild cards that could turn out poorly. And the good news for them is that they do have good data, because they're a data-centric organization, right? They've been collecting good data. They've had that all automated from their different main sources. They're running it through Salesforce, so they're getting good real-time information to help them guide good decision-making. And their partner organizations have been sharing their information during the pandemic as well, which helps out a lot. So they figured out in this most likely budget scenario that core programs are to continue, right? Dogs.com, of course, because it's strong on mission and it is strong on revenue. And the dog adoption program is going to continue at full steam, at full strength, because it is just so strong on mission. They're budgeting for the gala to continue at 75%. They know that they can be pretty confident in that number because they're in touch with hundreds of other similar organizations around the country. So they already have data from those organizations on how their galas have been playing out during the pandemic. And so they feel pretty confident that 75% is a safe number for similar organizations. And as we discussed earlier, the cat adoption program, grant's not renewed, so that's getting canceled. They can't afford to keep that going any longer, and the dog theater getting spun out. And so that's kind of what a most likely budget looks like for them, and that's their core budget that they're building out fully. Of course, there is a worst case scenario budget too, and this is one where the Save the Dog Society, they don't have to do a fully fledged elaborate budget, right, and have everybody on the staff go through the same process again and again, but they do need to show the big dollar items and how that impacts programs and other activities, right? And so they do need to do the math on that. And that's especially important for the finance committee and management to have clarity if this worst scenario comes to pass, what gets cut and what stays. And so they figured the worst thing that could happen, like if the organizations that are using dogs.com, if they start to really struggle, then they might see some drop off there, and it could be as much as 50% off on revenue. The worst gala kind of drop off that they've seen from similar organizations is 50%, so that's plugged into their worst case scenario. And because they have that drop in revenue, and they know that they need to pass that drop in revenue down to the dog adoption program. So they've detailed that, yeah, we have 4 different adoption sites, and we're gonna have to close one of them if we don't, or if we aren't able to keep the revenue high enough. And of course, cat adoption's gone, the dog theater is gone. The other thing about this worst case scenario budget is to be really clear about and set up in advance the triggers, right? Like, when are the decision points, right? And that might mean that there is a deep revenue review every quarter, and there might be adjustments in the spending on a quarterly basis rather than on the typical annual kind of basis. It means naming levers, right? And that's the one where, like, if revenue's down, how are we going to reflect that throughout the organization? And it's the dog adoption program, right? And so if revenue goes down, program activities are going to go down commensurately for that program. And also knowing the trigger points, right? And so they know they have their gala in March. And so they've been able to figure out that they'll be able to take the March gala results and apply those to Q3 and Q4 of the year. And so knowing that and knowing how they're going to play those out is really important to just good planning and not having to make rushed decisions in a crisis, because that's the worst time to try and make big decisions. And of course, knowing this in advance and being able to spell this out for your board can help keep their anxiety down low, right? They can be more confident in staff and not get into some of the behaviors that boards and human beings, for that matter, get into when they don't think there is a good plan in place to deal with an impending crisis. And of course, the Save the Dog Society, they do get to think about the best case scenario, because there are, they do have, it's a little bit of a Hail Mary pass, but it's not a total Hail Mary pass opportunity to get the grant renewal, right? They have a meeting set up with the donor who funded it for the first 2 years, and they think there might be a good chance, so they'll know by January whether or not that's getting renewed. And they're also, talking to a couple of people who have been the long-term fans of the dog theater. They're people who they know would not give for anything else in the organization. And so there's a possibility that there might be an angel donor. And so if that money comes through for those things, then we continue that activity, right? But we know the price tag, and we know at what time we have to make a decision to shut those down or spin them off or keep them alive. So this particular best case scenario for them, it doesn't need to be very complicated at all, right? It's either both of these activities, either it's on or it's off. This is when we need this amount of money, and that's the decision-making point. So that's kind of that on those. I have just a couple more tips, and then we're going to get over into questions and answers. And these are just some of my favorite generic budget tips. They're not as specific to the pandemic, but they're things that I've seen over and over again that can be helpful to nonprofit organizations. One is knowing that nonprofits can run a deficit. And every time I talk about nonprofits and budgeting, I run into one or more people who believe the opposite. So here, just in case one of you is on this presentation today, nonprofits can run a deficit. That doesn't mean you want to do it every year. You want to be strategic about it. You want to be intentional about it. And that might mean drawing down savings. That's why you have a rainy day fund, or it could even mean loans. But certainly, you don't want to do that willy-nilly. You don't want to do that to just put off the inevitable. So if you are going to run a deficit, you want to do that with a clear plan for turning things around, right? So it's not just something you take lightly, but you can absolutely run a deficit. Nonprofits can also make a profit, and this is another myth that I keep on running into. So, this might not be the year where you get to talk a lot about running a profit for your nonprofit, but you can. It's a common misunderstanding, and your nonprofit organization can make massive, massive profits. It can make crazy amounts of money. What it cannot do, and what makes it different from a for-profit corporation, is that the board, you can't give the profits to them, right? And typically nonprofit boards, they don't get much compensation at all, if any. And also staff, you need to continue to pay them at market rates. But basically what you can do if your nonprofit is running a profit is reinvest that in your mission, put some of it away for a rainy day fund, that sort of thing. And of course, if you are a nonprofit where revenue is highly fluid and you have tons and tons of wildcards, in addition to what I shared with you before, you might want to plan on just having massive budget adjustments every 3 months. And as much as that stinks, that might be easier for you than the craziness of trying to do a 12-month budget when just too many things are up in the air to even try and nail down. So it might be more of a rolling budget process for you, where as you're closing the end of the first quarter, you're building and the board is signing off on a second quarter budget, which is, I know you would not want to make it a regular practice every year, but that might be easier for you than juggling 1,000 wildcards, which might be the case for some of your organizations. So in summary, frugality. And if you take one thing home about frugality, have it be, how are you going to make this change in your organization? How are you going to identify areas where your organization has been cheap, and how are you going to develop the rationale to get changes to happen there? The matrix map, can you bring that to your organization and use that to create clarity, to gather good information, and to create buy-in for the inevitable difficult decisions that you might have to make? And on budgets, again, you don't have to necessarily do 2 or 3 full-fledged budgets, but you might need to really develop 2 or 3 alternative scenarios, both for your own sake when decision making comes, but so you can have the confidence of your board and your other stakeholders. So that's it. I'm Sean Hale, and I strongly believe, and I've seen over my 20 years in the nonprofit sector, that behind every successful nonprofit, you're going to find a strong back office. For those of you who are interested, I'm going to be digging more into things on like how to save money beyond just our belt tightening, which is another impulse that we have in nonprofits. I'll be doing a webinar on November 17th, and if you use the promo code CNP, right, for Center for Nonprofits and Philanthropy, you can use that to take 50% off the price of that webinar. You'll find the webinar at my website, seanhale.org. And of course, we're going to be going into question and answer here in just 10 seconds, but I'd also be happy to hear from you afterwards. My email is sean@seanhale.org. And so that's that. Kenny, are we going to Q&A, or do I put up the last slide at this point?
Yeah, let's go to Q&A. We'll keep that one up for now and see if there's any questions out there. I haven't seen any come in through the chat, but if folks have any, feel free to do so via the chat or personally. And I guess I'll start us off, but one question I have for you, Sean, is what you presented today is great, but what have you seen actually in practice in terms of organizations through the pandemic, whether they are actually going through and creating a best case or worst case budget, or they're actually utilizing the matrix? What have you personally seen in terms of organizations going through this process?
Yeah, organizations are doing both of these things. I have the good fortune of being plugged into a network of colleagues through the Austin Nonprofit Financial Leadership Group. And so I haven't sat with these colleagues through their processes, but I know through my engagement with them that they have been doing things like the multiple scenario planning, and like the that one I just ended with, where our organization, we couldn't even do a 12-month budget. We're going to be doing these 3-month quarterly budgets, and we have an idea of what the next quarter is, but we're going to be adjusting on the fly throughout the year because there are too many wild cards. And the matrix map, I've used it. Once I learned about it from a colleague, we put it to use in an organization that we were helping out that definitely was having its budgetary challenges, not pandemic related, but budgetary challenges, and it absolutely helped to bring clarity to something that had been really obscure, and that was that there were a couple of programs that really were down in quadrant D, right? Were not as highly aligned with the mission and losing money. And it helped to get us to having some really difficult decisions about what are we going to do about these programs. And ultimately, at least the decision for the short term was not to end them, but it was to figure out how are we going to get out of this situation where this program is in quadrant D. What changes are we going to make so that it becomes profitable, because we know it can be profitable. And so it sparked conversations that needed to happen for that one.
Kenny, this is Royce. I had a question. Sean, thank you very much for a very interesting presentation. I'm very interested in a big believer in rainy day funds for nonprofit organizations. And I wondered what your recommendation is on the size of a rainy day fund that an organization should strive to have in terms of maybe their overall annual budget.
Royce, thank you so much for that question. And it's a really good one. And it's one that now more nonprofits are realizing they should have asked themselves 3, 4, 5 years ago, right?
Right.
Because this is, for most organizations, this is not the year to build up the rainy day fund. It's the year to spend it and to break the piggy banks. But my general thought is to, you talk to different people and they'll say all kinds of different things. And I see a number of people say 6 months of operating expenses, which when I compare that to the small and mid-sized nonprofits I've had the pleasure of working with before, that's just a massive gap. And you might as well, I think, try and tell them to get to the moon. And so I would suggest doing more of a gradual approach. And can we every year put away 2 weeks worth of expenses and see it more as a baby steps kind of thing, rather than as something that is just, because what happens when it's such a big goal, it's so distant that it's hard to even strive for it. So I kind of treat it like, the road of 1,000 steps starts with, or road of 1,000 miles starts with a single step. But yeah, eventually, like at least I would be worried about, even before the pandemic, I would be worried about any organization that had less than a month's worth of operating funds on hand. And what by that I mean really like unrestricted money that they could use to plug holes or jump on an opportunity. And ideally, you should be every year putting aside a little bit by having a profit in your budget, right? And so building your way, maybe it's two weeks worth of funds this year and 2 weeks worth of next to get yourself to that 6 month. And that's the kind of thing that an engaged board can work with the staff on. Like, yeah, we just bring us a budget, again, outside of the pandemic year, right? Bring us a budget that is going to have $100,000 surplus, $100,000 profit, so that we can build up that rainy day fund.
Would you agree with me that during times like this with the pandemic, it is a good time to sell the board on that concept if they haven't bought it in the past?
Absolutely. And it's actually, that can help build credibility, right? I've often seen that staff and board can sometimes have a tension there, especially if there are some people on the board who are kind of fiscally minded and fiscally conservative and have maybe lived through a few economic downturns and seen the wisdom of this. And this is the time for the staff leaders to make that commitment and to go ahead and write that into kind of board resolutions and things like that. Like, yeah, as soon as we're on the other side of this, we are going to do that. And this is how we're going to do that. And even if it's painful, we're making this commitment. Just like, my wife's grandmother, the family was eating beans and rice for years for them to save up to buy land. And that's a part of their family legacy. And that's how you get to having assets, is by making those sacrifices.
Thank you very much.
Looks like Dr. Kerr posed a question. I'm happy to relay it, or feel free to jump in.
Figure out how to unmute. Thanks, Sean. This has been so great. I was wondering if you could share some methods that you have found particularly useful for helping nonprofit leaders understand the issues with CHEAP?
Well, the one that, I shared with you is absolutely a piece of it, right? It's the just doing the math. And so often we don't, we see the direct costs, right? But we don't think about those indirect costs. And by doing the math, we can kind of lock onto the CHEAP brain and lock onto its kind of receptors and what it's listening for, and use that to leverage it out of the cheapness, right? And get people thinking about those things. So it's if there's an inefficient process in the organization, like if data is getting entered in the CRM and it's getting duplicated in the accounting software and it's getting entered into spreadsheets over here because they're not integrated, it's, going and doing a good faith estimate on that and getting a sense of, wow, we have 80 hours of staff time getting wasted on this every year, and we're never sure like what the source of truth is for our data anyway, right? And so we're constantly getting lost in these other things. What if we got Salesforce? Yeah, it's going to cost us, $10 or $20,000 up front or whatever. But if we have a good system where we can house all this stuff, that investment, how quickly can we pay for that investment? And by showing that, even if things like, even if some of it's less tangible, very often the things like staff time, if you can start to put a number on those, can help to make the case for somebody making something that might feel like a sinful extravagance to get a brand new Honda Civic. Like, what do you mean I'm going to stop fixing up this old, 1972 Volkswagen bus, right? Never mind that it breaks down 10 times a year, and so I'm late for meetings and I'm always covered with grease because I'm having to, change the spark plugs or, fix this, that, or the other. That's harder to deal with. But when you actually quantify the time that's lost keeping that Volkswagen up to date, like all of a sudden that investment in a brand new Honda Civic starts to make sense.
All about the money.
It is. You can tie it back to the money, because it is some of that stuff. It's highly intangible, even if it's highly important, right? Like, it's important if you're going to a meeting with a funder, it's important to not show up late, and it's important not to show up with grease on your hands because you've been driving a 1972 vehicle that's not reliable. But it's hard to quantify that, but you can quantify so many other pieces of that.
Sean, one thing you brought up when I asked the question about what have you seen in practice, just in terms of organizations actually going through the process of doing a best case or worst case scenario. And you mentioned the pandemic has caused organizations to really think about their budgets on a monthly basis, quarterly, whatever it may be. Have we, or in your estimation, have we kind of moved past that time to where organizations, due to the pandemic, are able to focus on a budget that represents what the next year looks like? Or are we still in that situation where we're looking at our budget pretty closely from, let's just say, every other month to quarterly at this point? Or are nonprofits settling back in to what that process, what might feel like normal?
Yeah, so much depends on the organization. Like, I've been in touch with folks at organizations where they do, it's these big grants, and they already know like what all their revenue is going to look like for the next 12, 24 months, right? Or they know what 80 or 90% of that is. And so they're able to do maybe just one budget or kind of a small best case, worst case kind of thing, but they don't have these big wildcards to deal with. There are other organizations where they don't have those grants from the funders who are kind of highly reliable, come through in any kind of emergency. And so it kind of really depends organization to organization, but certainly I would expect that those who haven't already been exercising these muscles for the last 6, 7, 8 months, either this is not an issue for them, or they're in an extreme amount of pain right now. If, like, for example, they have been spending down their savings or even taking out loans without thinking about how they're going to manage this situation long term. So those are the ones I'd really worry about, is the ones who have not been using this as a time to really think through, how are we going to make a tough decision, and when are we going to have to make a tough decision? Like, if they've been spending down the savings and have not developed those worst case scenarios and just kind of putting off the inevitable, I would really worry about those organizations right now.
Great. Looks like we're real sharp on time today. Unless any other questions, we'll probably stop there and thank everyone for joining us again today. We appreciate it. Looks like Dr. Brown put in the chat that next week we have our webinar on responding to COVID-19 with a guide to decision making and scenario planning. You can find that at the link that we've included a couple of times there. And if anyone cares to learn more about our center, you can contact us at the email, phone number, or the webpage listed below. But as usual, we thank you for paying attention to our stuff, and I hope to see you next week as well. Thank you so much for joining us today.